Why did you reclassify Title I in 2002? Look, I read your colleague's paper, and I found a lot of the arguments compelling, quite frankly. But what it says to me is not just the FCC can't do net neutrality, it's that the FCC can't do anything on information networks. And while I appreciate the soundbite of regulation by any means necessary, look, what I'm really talking about is there are public interest outcomes that have broad support in the Congress and in the public and in the White House that the Commission is tasked to achieve. And it cannot simply fail to achieve that and throw up its hands and say we can't do anything when there are options available to it. And that's, I think, the place that they're being driven right now, whether they like it or not.
I just need to respond very quickly because let's talk about concrete examples. I mean, if the Commission is seeking some sort of extension, or using ancillary jurisdiction in the context of certain existing laws or standards, if they can tether that to something that actually has statutory authority or a solid record, then I understand it, I can appreciate it. I might argue against it. I filed comments today, again, with Baron Soka in this Empowering Parents Protecting Children proceeding, which has a lot of discussion there about the chairman's desire to expand the Children's Television Act. I happen to think that's a bad idea to apply the Children's Television Act model to the internet, but you know what? At least there's a Children's Television Act you can point to and say this is where we derive our authority to go regulating these other ways. What is it for net neutrality?
So, I admire Adam's consistency in arguing Title I is weak and inept in all cases. I wish that that were the common position of critics at the Commission. The problem with trying to find other places in the Act for Title I authority, if you take as your assumption that Title I authority is wounded, is that you have carriers who are saying, on the one hand, Title I can't be used for these outcomes. On the other hand, saying Title I is perfectly sufficient for you to move forward. You can't possibly go into Title II and proceed legislation over clarifying authority. The Commission is put into a trap where it's forced to roll the dice on Title I authority, which it may not have.
The Commission shouldn't be rolling the dice at all. They should go to the Congress and basically ask lawmakers for new authority. I mean, let's talk about Title VII. You know, there are other things, other ideas that have been put out there before about ways you could do this. Now, I'm going to fight you on that. I'm going to say we shouldn't do that, go down that path. But at least it would legitimize the process. This game about trying to pigeonhole new technologies and platforms into old regulatory constructs and silos just doesn't make sense. It's a contortion of the law in a very substantive and important way. I mean, the Commission is not a lawless entity. It just can't make these things up as it goes along.
Let's move beyond the legal authority question. You have a quick one, Ben? Okay. So, Ben, the factual predicate for your initial opening statement was about competition and the role of cable and telcos in dominating the market. What about wireless? Is the additional level of competition in wireless make you more comfortable? Should these rules extend to wireless? What's your vision of what the role wireless plays long term in the marketplace?
So I think that the wireless market has hit its high water mark of competition and is beginning to consolidate. I think the current debates over the spectrum crisis indicate that the argument is, well, wireless networks are being inundated with data, they can't handle it, we got to get more spectrum in the market, and so we need to quickly make that spectrum available to commercial providers. But we have two commercial providers who already have twice as much spectrum as everybody else. And they are the ones most often used as the ones in the data crunch and who are about to fall off the cliff of overuse. So if we're making available new spectrum, are we making that spectrum available to competitors who will then be even with the ones who we say are in a crisis today, or are we giving it to the dominant market players to meet the needs that we say we need to meet? And that may be the way it has to happen. There may not be enough spectrum to go around for competition to flourish. I think that we need to face up to the fact that the wireless market is going to decline in competitive force because of the scarcity of spectrum. I think it's going to be a long time before wireless, if ever, is a substitutable competitor to wireline. And I think that you ought to have a common set of rules across all these technologies.
So net neutrality should apply. These rules, if adopted, should apply to wireless and presumably every other platform as well, satellite and others.
Yeah, I think it has to be a technologically neutral rule or it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, the economics and the engineering of wireless markets is such that it's going to make it very difficult for those carriers to transmit, high bandwidth video and other types of content without having some sort of reasonable network management policies in place. And if we make that essentially per se illegal, I think that's really troubling, because it begs the question, what are they going to do when they can't handle that capacity? Now look, the one thing that I think Ben and I and everybody can agree on is we all want more spectrum, right? That's the easiest thing to agree on in the world. How we want it allocated, however, becomes the first part of the fight. Where we get it is another part. And we can continue down on that path. But the fact of the matter is that I'm actually going to maybe surprise some people, including Ben, and agree with them that, yeah, there's probably going to be some more consolidation in the wireless marketplace. But let's recall, the economics of network industries is not those of corn or lemonade stand. I mean, we're never going to have 3 dozen competitors in this field. But we're damn lucky that we've got a couple. And that's a hell of a lot more than a lot of other countries have. And the fact of the matter is that we started on this road of experimenting with competition, but we have to understand the limits of high fixed cost, low marginal cost type industries are such that you're only going to have so many major competitors who provide end-to-end nationwide, high bandwidth, high throughput kind of networks. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that if that occurs. They need more flexibility in terms of ownership patterns, spectrum regulation, and more. And they're going to need it in terms of how they manage their networks if we're going to have those services.
Now, what about Ben's assertion that if you do any rules here should apply to all platforms equally?
Well, I'm all for sort of regulatory equality. It sounds good to me. Let's make that bar as low as possible, and not burden everybody with excessive rules in the name of regulatory parity. I mean, there's 2 ways to skin the cat. You can regulate up or deregulate down, and I think we have a difference of opinion about how to do that.
Let me take 2 points that you made. One is, and I'll agree with them, and then I'll take it someplace we can talk about.
It's more fun. It is debate after all.
So first, you said wireless networks won't be able to abide by net neutrality rules without reasonable network management. Absolutely. That's why there's reasonable network management front and center inside the net neutrality proposal. And I fully expect that reasonable network management standards will take into account the differences between different technologies. There are differences between cable and fiber. There are differences, just as there are differences between different kinds of wireless technologies. That will have to be a part of the flexibility. But the key distinction there is, am I discriminating against different kinds of traffic for the purpose of commercial gain and influence and control over the content market? Or am I differentiating between different kinds of traffic for an engineering purpose? Those are the bright line categories of what's inbounds and what's out of bounds. Second point is, I think we agree that there's likely to be concentration in the broadband market, that it's a high fixed cost industry, there's only going to be a certain number of providers. My argument is, and therefore they have a financial incentive to reach over into the content market and try to influence it and distort it. And that is something that philosophically I think we ought to bar using a net neutrality.
So, Ben's view of the carriers in all these cases is kind of like, Mr. Burns on The Simpsons, sort of the nefarious schemer, like, we're out to get you today. I'm sorry, I just don't see a lot of examples of that. Maybe Ben could say, well, that's only because we've got the Damocles sword of regulation pulling over their necks. I just don't buy that. I mean, these boogeyman Chicken Little theories I hear about them as content regulators. I mean, let's get something straight from an economic perspective. Carriers only make money by carrying more content. I mean, the reality is if they play games with content, start tinkering with it, I mean, they're going to end up really pissing off most of their customers. So that's not a good recipe for economic success, or to sort of convince your shareholders that you're doing what's in their interest. So I'm sorry, I just don't buy that. I'm also relieved that that you're talking about allowing reasonable network management. I do hope that really occurs and that the commission will allow it. But, I mean, everything I see from what Free Press has said, whether it be on the conduct, content, or pricing side, is exactly the opposite. It's all across the board. You want intervention at every step, even going back and forth on that question of pricing flexibility and whether you allow meter billing and things like that.
Well, let me take 2 points. One is, I'm a Comcast subscriber in the Maryland suburbs. I have reluctantly been a Comcast subscriber. I'm a Comcast subscriber because I don't have any choice. Because the only choice I have is a 1 megabit DSL line. And I want something better. I have an effective monopoly if I want better than 3 megabits into my house. That is not a situation where I can do anything about it if Comcast does things to me. Believe me, my dealings with the Comcast service representatives have made me want to switch many, many times. I have nowhere to go. That's problem number 1. Problem number two is your characterization of the problems anticipated from a non-neutral internet as Chicken Little, I think is out of step with the record. As I pointed out before, the carriers themselves repeatedly, over and over, argue you cannot institute network neutrality rules because it will inhibit us innovating, it will not give us the flexibility we need, we will not be able to get a sufficient return on investment. All of those things imply we will build a business model based on discriminatory conduct which would otherwise be illegal. So it's not that I'm anticipating Mr. Burns censoring the Washington Post. I'm anticipating a business operation that sees an opportunity to make money and pursues it.
Yeah, but you've blurred these lines in the past. And a moment ago you were talking about them engaging in some sort of discrimination against content, and now you're talking about a very different thing, which is them trying to find a new business model that might actually be profitable, that can help them grow their networks. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, you talk about these, fast lanes or fast services as if it's inherently discriminatory. I mean, the reality is that sort of service offering is all over a capitalist economy. There are all sorts of specialized services, enhanced services, higher speed, faster services that are offered at a premium. I mean, why in the world would we make that illegal? That's essentially how you cross-subsidize the broader underlying service, which in many cases can be very cheap or free, and that's hopefully the model we'll get to. That's essentially the internet model, right? I mean, getting the freemium model, the upsell model. Maybe we can apply that more broadly in the future if we have premium offerings for broadband. I don't know, but we won't know without experimentation.
I'd like to open it up for questions for a few minutes. Yes, and if you can identify yourself, that'd be great if you were with.
Hi, Adam. Stephanie Joyce.
Hi.
I've seen you at many GitHub summits. Loved your remarks. There are many questions I want to ask you, but I want you to let me in the door at the next GitHub summit, so I'll just leave it with this.
I'm going to charge you a premium rate.
It's American, right? I just want to ask you this. There are 6 principles in the NPRM for open internet, built on Chairman Paul's 4 principles added to. One of the additions is transparency. And all that says is you have to be very clear with your customers about what they can expect from throughput, what are the network practices that you, Mr. NetOp, engage in, so everybody knows what's going on. Will you give us that? Can you sign up on transparency?
Yeah, transparency is a great goal, and I think obviously it's hard to argue against it in almost any context. I mean, I don't want it to be used as a Trojan horse for a lot of other types of regulation. I mean, the question is, what does it get when you get down to concrete specifics about what it means? But the best of all forms of transparency is obviously a contracts and terms of service that spells out for people what it is that you're providing. And in the capitalist economy, that's the sort of transparency that we have at work in all sorts of different business arrangements. And you're also held to that standard with that contract. And so that's where transparency begins. Now, if the FCC wants to try to enforce that, there are questions about how to do so. But where beyond that do we want to take it? I mean, they have pretty clear indications, usually in the terms of service, of what things they allow and don't allow. If it's something above and beyond that, that's when I start asking questions.
Is the FCC the right agency to implement a transparency?
Well, again, we have, the Federal Trade Commission enforces unfair and deceptive practices and can deal with some of these things as well. And obviously a lot of other watchdog groups try to hold them to these promises. Well.
All right, if I can follow up with Ben, is transparency enough for you? That'd be enough, that's what we got.
No. Really, I mean, just because they're telling you that you're being screwed doesn't make it okay.
That's a quote. Greg.
Greg Ledger, Sean Rogers. In terms of the jurisdiction between the FCC and the FCC, there's the common carrier exception or exemption. What do you think that needs to be done with that? I mean, the FTC is really the enforcement agency, and the FCC is the rulemaking agency, and they always get in these battles. And it's interesting to see, depending on what the issue is, what the carriers with jurisdiction want to be involved. What do you think on the future of that?
Do you want to handle it first?
Really quickly, I just want to reiterate something I mentioned a moment ago, that this project that PFF put together 5 years ago, the Digital Age Communications Act project, which brought together 50 respected economists, academics, lawyers, to try to figure out what model might be best going forward. Basically said, look, import the FTC mechanisms, standards, antitrust standards, everything else, unfair practices, everything, over to the FCC. I was actually a dissenter from this own report of my organization, by the way, and said, I don't know, I mean, it makes me uncomfortable. Why can't the FTC just do it, right? And people made the points like you're making. Well, there's existing standards, it make that difficult, there's interagency fights. And I said, well, we could get rid of the FCC and just give it all to the No, I lost, okay? But the model is a good second best model, which is that if you handed the FCC that sort of authority, but limited the authority to the sort of approach that the FTC takes in adjudicating these things, then I think you could solve a lot of these problems, and that would be preferable to, again, the preemptive sort of regime I described before.
I think there are advantages to dual jurisdiction. I think the common carriers exemption is in some ways irrelevant at the moment because most residential retail broadband providers are not classified as common carriers. However, this is sort of an underreported fact. A great deal of the broadband market still is under Title II. Most of the rural operators continue to classify themselves as Title II in order to receive universal service funds. Almost all of the enterprise market is Title II. All of the wholesale transport market is still Title II. So the FTC's common carrier exemption still does have a significant impact over what they have, how broad their oversight is.
Do you think it should be kept?
Yeah, would you repeal it?
I would repeal it.
Add repeal or no?
I don't know.
No. More questions from the audience? Sure.
This is a loaded question since I work with Adam. I'm very so.
I'm paying you to say that.
No, but
You better be good.
I was going to say, can I get a raise?
the problem here seems to be, Ben, that you think that there isn't enough competition. So why not deal with the problem on infrastructure by reforming local franchising authority to break that local, very corrupt, as we all know, monopoly local authorities have over how much infrastructure can be rolled out. And then in the wireless context, why not free up more spectrum? As Adam has proposed, there's lots of spectrum out there that could be reallocated for this use that would make these markets more competitive and reduce the need for the regulations you think you hinge on this lack of competition.
So first, no one disagrees there should be more spectrum made available. The question is, where do you get it and how do you allocate it? And that's a many-year project. I mean, we're realistically 7 to 10 years out, even if we started today with a great plan for how to do that, before anybody's deploying a network that has the capabilities of even hoping to compete against the wireless provider. Second, I think, I don't know of any local governments who are eager to have more providers come and pay the franchise fees. If there are issues beyond that can be addressed, I think that's a fair point to raise. I think you look at the last 10 years over the course of communications policy in the United States where we've sort of bet on the idea of new competitors coming along and essentially building duplicate networks. It was going to be broadband over power line was just around the corner, satellite was going to come along and compete, wireless industry was going to become a substitutable competitor. It's just never happened. None of that has ever developed. And instead, we've had further consolidation, and now we're facing a situation where I think in large parts of the country, you're going to have a cable operator that goes to DOCSIS 3.0 and a telco that is maxing out at 6 to 10 megabits. And you're going to have a virtual monopoly if you want a next generation broadband service. And so there continues to be serious competition problems in the industry, and they may be ones that are inherent and natural to the market, and I think we have to deal with them as such.
Okay, let's go to closing remarks. 2 minutes apiece. Adam, you go first.
I'm sorry we didn't have more of a chance to talk about pricing issues because even though I'm up here defending reasonable network management, the reality is that I think there's a very weak case to be made for network meddling, generally speaking, but there's a great case to be made for proper network pricing. And I have long advocated in my work that if we could get pricing mechanisms right, if we could allow more experimentation with things like metered billing or whatever else, or maybe new advertising schemes, who knows, that goes a long way towards solving a lot of these problems so the carriers don't have to try to figure out how to manage networks in other ways. There was a time when Free Press had an interesting filing that I wholeheartedly supported, saying that was the path forward and that wasn't a bad idea, but they unfortunately reversed themselves 3 months later and said, no, metered billing's a bad idea. So I don't want to eat into Ben's few minutes, but why didn't you reverse yourself on that, Ben?
If you read that filing, what we said was, that was in the context of the Comcast case, we said metered billing is preferable to illegal blocking, which it is. I continue to believe that. But the next filing was, metered billing is not a great solution either. It's not illegal, and we don't think that there needs to be a regulation to make it illegal. It's just We don't think it's a great solution. So we'll set that aside. And to close, I would say only, to me, this debate is about outcomes. It's about outcomes in the net neutrality context. It's about outcomes from the point of view of what can government do to promote consumer welfare, competition, innovation, investment. We go to war with the army we have. The commission is not perfect. The government is not perfect. But it to me is axiomatic that there are things that we can do that will make improvements and achieve better outcomes for the public. To me, net neutrality is among the least interventionist, the least regulatory solutions to guaranteeing an open market for speech and commerce on the internet. And that's why we've stood for it since the debate began, and I hope to see it through to the end.
Great. I want to thank our panelists for intellectually robust and nimble the exchange between them, and a round of applause. And I'll turn it back to
Adam and Ben, let me echo Brian's thanks. Thank you so much for being here and participating in such a lively debate. And thank you, Brian, for moderating. If you'll give us just a few minutes, we'll get set up for the next panel, and then we'll continue on.
Hey, how are you? Good, how are you? Good to see you as well.
It's fun.
Good job. Good job getting them, you know, it's hard to get it all put on. Classic. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, you know, you don't want the one where they each could just trade copies and usually make the argument. Yeah, and it's really hard to get there.
I don't know. I always have this you're on the side of digging deeper and trying to get them off, or you're on the side of trying to cover more stuff. Right. So I don't know. And I also am always so paranoid again. Like, I want the questions to be so I tried that.
Yeah, no, I thought it was pretty good that you picked up on one and sort of like that. The only thing I was tempted to ask the question, you know, it's just, they had a, I don't know, this morning when Rick and Kathy were talking about something
No.
that was what I was going to try to push to the because they actually had a fairly complicated, of course it was because they had so it was pretty, you know, Rick and Kathy were sort of like, here's our idea, you're getting engineers together. So I thought it was, you know, giving some in addition to how what's more yeah, anyway, I almost guessed, but I mean, they sort of touched on it, you know.
And I don't know what they did this morning, so
right. I mean, Adam was sort of like Ben, so, but I mean, the rising rule blood. So, anyway, well, I'm supposed to go down,
Kathleen will leave on March 1st.
Retire? Yeah,
That's which is sad for us. Yeah, she's going to be the audience.
Oh, okay.
I'd love to do it. I'll try my best.
It's not the best timing because we all just got back from all the snow on Thursday afternoon. I checked out I'm an office here, but that doesn't affect my ability to enjoy Is she a former student of yours? Oh, excellent. Do you mean? Okay. Very good. Oh, yeah. That's great experience. That's what That's quite nice. Okay. Back to better. Oh, it's good to see you too. Yeah, go for it. After you
Simultrack, this seriously big
It's kind of interesting. It's just like
that's an interesting job opportunity in the Northeast. Business on weekends.
How are you going to see her?
My wife and children are in her house.
Yes, there's one place, right? It's weather weeknight. That's right. Location this time.
Oh, that's in the.
Yeah, ideally.
It's right on.
Yeah, I know.
It's easy. It's right across the street. Yeah, exactly.
The broadcast.
Decided we just started a new workshop. Some smart grid. Yeah. Oh, sure. Very psyched about that. Yeah.
You can all take your seats. It's
not like we're.
Right, exactly.
This is you to the people I haven't seen.
I don't know.
nice job.
If I see these, you'll simply see.
Yes, but you have to learn.
It was the most interesting thing I've ever seen.
Wow. Yes, I've seen his part.
Why would I bring cards to an event like this? Come on, what am I? Hey. Oh, yeah. Okay, so, long story short, she scheduled it for Thursday. But, it's George Gilbert speaking, and I asked him about this. He's all these brilliant writers, and we're speaking on the sleep bad, so I'm just going to skip this call.
Wow.
So I'll be on the phone.
I don't know card either, so I'll send it.
Yeah, but I don't use cards.
I think we're at.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our third panel, content regulation on the second and third screen. And please let me introduce our moderator for today, visiting associate professor from Catholic University, Columbus School of Law, Professor Donna Gray.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our panel today is going to focus on content regulation on the second and third screens. And I think that just one of the many, many benefits of broadband is the increase in the amount and variety different types of content that become available to the viewing and listening public and to consumers. And in preparing for this panel, I did a little bit of research myself, just to see, obviously there are some people who are proponents of content regulation, other people who think it's not necessary, or is content on the internet and broadband all good? Are there any downsides? So just to see what was out there in cyber world about this, I did a Google search, and it yielded, I put in benefits of broadband, and I got 10 million hits. Interestingly enough, I put in benefits of new media, and I got over 550 million hits. And then I put in dangers of new media, and I didn't get nearly as many, but I got quite a few nonetheless. There were about 1 million on dangers of privacy and online identity theft, 775,000 dangers of online dating, and then one that I didn't even bother to look up, but it's one of my own dangers of the internet, and that's the danger of believing everything that you see on a blog. While there's a greater variety of content, and that's one of the benefits, there are also some potential problems that may occur involving the second and third screen, one of the new big benefits of broadband. And one concern is possible regulation of that content. Certainly it's not been the marquee issue in this debate, but it lurks in a number of recent and pending FCC proceedings. It has its proponents, some opponents, and some others just observing and watching very carefully. Before I introduce the panelists and get started with the questions, I'd like to say just a few words about the second and third screens. Those terms most typically, as most of you know, connote the computer, online, and a mobile device, with the TV set, which will make Aaron happy, still holding the pride of place as the first screen. The second and third screens can serve as a substitute for a television. They're used with increasing frequency while watching TV for multimedia multitasking. They're both a bane and a blessing for advertisers. They gave Nielsen a whole new product to market. They've proven a major contributor to stress in the health circles. They are viewed as a potential for exacerbating pervasiveness of media content that is harmful to children or objectionable to adult viewers. And they are also viewed as a potential for government intervention. There have been calls for content regulation on the second and third screen, and they've not escaped the FCC's notice. And they're either being openly considered or lurking somewhere in the depths of various proceedings that are now before the Commission. The issues present in the debate over network neutrality in the National Broadband Plan. In an address to the Media Institute just this past December, NCTA President Kyle McSlara pointed to the irony of calls for the FCC to prevent management practices of the network in order to protect people's First Amendment rights, and point to the irony that when the First Amendment is mentioned, it's always been a limit on the government's power, not an empowerment of the government. First Amendment concerns about protecting children are one of the areas where the FCC has been looking at potential regulation of the second and third screens. Congress had a proceeding where they were looking into implementation of the Child Safe Viewing Act and directed the Commission to have a proceeding on that. And a report on that was issued by the Commission in August 2009, and that led to the proceeding that Adam mentioned in his presentation about empowering parents and protecting children. And the comments on that proceeding, I believe, are due today. Last, but certainly not least, is a more recent proceeding, the Future of Media proceeding. which was launched by the Commission in January. And in that proceeding, the FCC also teed up issues about social media and other kinds of content that appears or is available on the second and third screens. Just this past week, the FCC extended the comment deadline in that proceeding from March to May. Well, I can think of no better group to address the issue of potential regulation of content on the second and third screens than our panelists today. They are really a collective brain trust of expertise and experience on content and media. First, we have Aaron Dozier, who's Associate General Counsel, Legal and Regulatory Affairs at NAB, National Association of Broadcasters. Julie Carney, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at the Consumer Electronics Association, and I might also add that Julie is a graduate of the Communications Law Studies program at Catholic University.
A really long time ago.
Margaret Toby, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at NBC Universal. And Cheryl Yanza, who is truly one of Washington's most able advocates for media in the public interest, and is continuing to work with her former association with the United Church of Christ's Office of Communication and other public media interests in her new consulting firm. And I love the name of this. This is a great name for a consulting firm in public media, A Learned Hand. So I'd like to congratulate Cheryl on her new venture. And then start off with some questions to all of our panelists. I'm going to ask them to go down the table and briefly talk about some of the opportunities that each of their organizations is pursuing with respect to content on the second and third screens. And then to mention just briefly any particular concerns that these organizations have about the direction that government policy is taking with regard to that kind of media distribution. So we'll start with Aaron. Opportunities.
Thanks so much for that introduction.
Concerns.
Is this loud enough? Am I close enough? Okay. As Donna mentioned, I'm Aaron Dozier. I'm part of the legal department at the National Association of Broadcasters, and as someone who's primarily and predominantly associated with the first screen, I'm really happy to be here today to talk about the second and third screen, because there is a lot of broadcast programming on the second and third screens, and it's going to continue to grow, and that's the direction we're headed in addition to our long-standing first screen presence. Broadcasting is being viewed over broadband connections, on broadcast station websites as well as broadcast network type websites, on handheld devices through arrangements with wireless carriers, but increasingly direct over the air from broadcast towers to mobile handheld devices. And so these new platforms, these other platforms, don't diminish the ongoing importance of the first screen. They don't diminish the ongoing importance of free over-the-air broadcasting to the public. This system is still and will remain a cornerstone of our nation's overall communications ecosystem, and is unique in its local, focus and local emphasis. So I think broadcasting is going to continue to be a part of this new multi-platform world of news, information, entertainment. So today, I think the main things I'll probably talk about are broadcasters' role on the second and third screens with a couple of examples, why regulation of content on the second and third screens would face an uphill climb in terms of applicable legal standards, and also why such regulation would, as a matter of public policy, be a poor choice given the various practical ways of controlling content and achieving public policy goals on these platforms. And also would be a poor public policy choice in terms of hindering or adversely affecting the development of these still relatively new types of services. So that I'll turn to Julie Cohen. As someone said in a panel earlier when the mic was handed over, we call this spectrum sharing, I guess. Sorry to steal. I think it was Matt Wood. I'm Julie Carney. I'm with the Consumer Electronics Association. We represent over 2,000 companies ranging from Google to Nokia to Verizon is a member, Panasonic, Samsung. Basically, you walk into a Best Buy and our members are right there, including Best Buy itself. CEA's position
The FCC is really required to let consumers get content and have access to content no matter what device they are accessing that content on. We're living in very dynamic times. Technologies are constantly changing. We need to live in a world where regulation doesn't hinder the use of the technologies, but rather enables the use of the technologies. Regulations obviously should be crafted, if necessary, in a very thoughtful way, taking into account that we need to allow innovation to flourish. So I mentioned Best Buy. You only have to go into a Best Buy or go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas to see that applications and devices are developing all the time with new media platforms. So I draw your attention to some data as of January 2010. This is household ownership rates for new media receiving devices and internet access. Cell phones, 91% of households have a cell phone. 33% have a smartphone. 87% of households have computers. 75% of those are desktops, and 59% are laptops. That is a huge penetration, and it's growing all the time. The big things for us, now again, CEA doesn't produce devices, but when we're looking at representing companies who do make devices for the second and third screens, these are sort of the big things. Smart books, tablets and slates, and netbooks. These include the Lenovo Skylight, the Compact AirLife, you got the Apple iPad, of course, and then of course netbooks like the Dell Mini series, and of course you've got iPhone, the Motorola Droid, and the Nokia N97. These are all devices we never would have thought of 5 years ago, but CEA is excited to be working with companies that are getting devices into your hands and doing it very quickly worldwide. So. Again, the Commission needs to be mindful that whatever regulations we craft today cannot hamper the rollout of these fabulous devices tomorrow.
Margaret.
Thank you, Donna. As Donna said, I'm Margaret Tobey, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for NBC Universal. My company has fully embraced, and in fact was an early adopter of new media platforms extending from the first screen to the second and the third screens. We were a founding member in 2007 along with Fox of Hulu, a wildly popular online video, professionally produced video source. And we were also a founding member of the Open Mobile Video Coalition, which pushed through in record time the new ATSC standard for the mobile and handheld television transmission that Aaron mentioned briefly, which has been in beta testing mode and is ready for commercial launch with amazing little devices using our station's digital spectrum. So we're very excited about that. And we are very proud of our 26 owned and operated stations, 10 affiliated with NBC, another 15 with our network, Spanish language network Telemundo, and one independent Spanish language station. And we continue to believe, as Aaron has articulated, that those stations provide a very valuable service in the local communities and with the local focus particularly in our cornerstone of the communications ecosystem and should stay that way. But more and more, NBC Universal has become a content company. We own a number of cable channels, 2 television networks, and a movie studio. And so we share the goal of all content creators, which is maximum distribution. So we see the expansion of platforms and outlets as a good development and an opportunity for us to get our content out there. We're working very hard to capitalize on these new platforms. But we do have 2 major concerns with respect to government policies affecting online policy, and you will determine after hearing me speak that I'm a broken record on these topics, but so be it. The first, if broadband is truly to become the pillar of our 21st century society, which I think many of us think it is, it must be subject to the rule of law. It can't just be the Wild West or Somalia where an anything goes, hear no evil, see no evil, take the money and run attitude prevails. High quality content is very expensive to produce, and recouping the investment is critical to its continued production. The government must be committed to ensuring a safe and secure broadband internet environment, safe from viruses, worms, and malware, safe from child pornography, and safe from the tidal wave of online piracy of copyrighted material that kills American jobs and jeopardizes the continued production of high-quality video content and its availability online. So we are very gratified that the FCC has recognized in the Open Internet proceeding that the core principles, the 4 principles that we have, the 2 that are being considered, apply only to lawful content and lawful transmission of content. But what does it mean in the real world? As we've argued many times before the Commission, this means that the government has to let the affected parties work together to devise solutions to the problem. And reasonable network management, which you heard about in the lively debate, has to give ISPs the flexibility to address the problem without the sort of Damocles hanging over their head of enforcement actions for steps they may take that they don't even know are unlawful. I guess our second concern, and you'll hear more about piracy, I will be a broken record, but the second concern that we have is that the widespread availability of professionally produced full-length video programming online is really a nascent industry in the scheme of things, and everyone involved in this industry is struggling to find the right business model, whether it's ad-supported subscription or a combination of the 2. But for the type of video programming I'm talking about, free really isn't an option. Someone has to pay the writers, directors, actors, carpenters, electricians, caterers, hairdressers, seamstresses, dry cleaners, and all the many thousands of workers who contribute to the production of high-quality video programming, including films and TV shows. Our CEO has been famously quoted for a remark he made that while we want to be fully engaged in the new online world, we don't want to trade analog dollars for digital pennies. He has recently upgraded this to trading analog dollars for digital nickels, but the point remains the same. How do we monetize the online content and recoup our substantial investment in its production? We may not quite figure out the answer yet, but we know that the answer is not government intervention in and regulation of the evolving business models. The defining characteristic of the internet over the last 15 to 20 years has been its remarkable history of experimentation and innovation without direct governmental involvement in the technological developments and the business models. We think it needs to stay that way.
Cheryl. Hi, thanks for having me here. Thanks for Catholic University for inviting us and for moderating. As Donna said, I'm a consultant. I've been a consultant for a little while, but it's within the public interest community, and I work a lot with the United Church of Christ. So some of the things here are from material and things that I've worked with UCC, but the comments are my own. So Donna's question was, how is your constituency using broadband, and do you have concerns? You know, what's on your mind? And the 2 answers are, you know, in terms of UCC and the nonprofit sector, obviously, just like everyday Americans, we're using broadband more and more every day. And the great news is that now everybody can be a content creator, and that's, you know, fabulous. The things that I have a concern about in terms of as a public interest advocate is that we're moving to this new technological world, and there's always an incentive to say, oh, we're in this new world, let's just throw everything out and start over, and it'll be fresh and clean. You know, which is also, you know, in some ways appealing to me. But there are core values, political, societal values that have been embedded in a historic stovepipe approach. And I think we realize we can't keep in that stovepipe approach any longer. But what's mostly on my mind is, you know, how do you get to the next step? How do you get to the future? That these core values that we incorporated into our telecommunications law and policy are not just things that we can, you know, throw away and society will be okay if we get rid of them. And you know, there's a lot of debate over lunch, and you know, the boogeyman that's held up is, you know, the government is the absolute essence of evil, and the government may never be involved. And I, you know, clearly agree that who we want making decisions about what content gets out to the people are the content creators themselves, the content companies, the people who are watching the content should get to pick what they want to see. We don't want the government saying, okay, you have good content, you have bad content. We don't want that. But what the government does have a role in is maximizing that content and maximizing that choice. Because one of the things I thought was most revealing when Adam over lunch said, well, we're only going to have a couple of network operators, and we're lucky to have them. We're glad to have them. Well, great. We're only going to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, maybe. If you count the different technology distribution networks. Historically, those distribution networks have always been the gatekeeper. So that when you're a content creator and you're a new entrepreneur, you have to go through that gate. And if you can't get through that gate, doesn't matter how good your stuff is, doesn't matter whether everybody would buy it. If you could be successful, it's not out there. So that's one role for the government. The other point that I wanted to raise, because I know we're going to get a lot into anticipate we'll get into the government as a source of all evil, is that in this case, in terms of the operations of the markets, we have something like a moral hazard problem. Okay, we have societal benefits that we get from content and some harms that we get from content. But those benefits and harms don't actually always redound to the companies who create them. So if NBC perchance would decide that it's no longer profitable for them to make news of any kind at the local level, at the national level, and they figure out, well, that's actually the most profitable decision we can make. That's the right decision for them to make in our capitalist economy. That's the right decision for them. But obviously society would suffer a tremendous loss. And that type of decision can be, replicated throughout the various content areas. I mean, UCC's done a lot of work on helping protect children. It's a similar situation. You can make a lot of money selling junk food to kids. You can make a lot of money selling, developmentally inappropriate stuff to kids. Parents are supposed to be making those choices. The market's shown not to work. So those are the things that have been on our mind, and I've just touched on those few, and I look forward to the rest of the questions in the panel.
Well, I am going to ask the 2 people on the panel who are content providers and producers to respond to that, and I have a couple of questions, areas that I would like them to comment on that touch on a little bit on what Cheryl has been saying. I'm going to start with Aaron. Aaron, given the concerns that Cheryl has raised, and I hear in them children's television perhaps, maybe even fairness doctrine revival on the second and third screen, maybe?
Fairness doctrine revival.
Okay, well she's conceded that, so we'll stay with children's television.
Public interest regulation, the importance of journalism, Title III.
Okay, we'll stick with public interest regulation in whatever form. But does NAB, Aaron, anticipate that with all of these new platforms for media and the new opportunities that are there, there's likely to be more or less political pressure for keeping strong or even expanded children's television regulations, or even something like revival of a fairness doctrine?
Yeah, I think it's hard to gauge the level of political pressure that's going to be on the commission or even Congress to regulate new outlets or new platforms in ways that are similar to how broadcasting, free over-the-air broadcasting that is regulated today, or how it's been regulated in the past. So the idea of importing broadcast-style regulations onto these new platforms, whether the provider is a broadcaster or some other type of totally independent content provider or a cable system who happens to also have own networks, it's regardless of who that content provider is, I think we need to look at having some sort of symmetry across whoever that provider is based on the platform. I think, and the reason for that is just that, regardless of political pressure, courts are only going to tolerate so much. I think the courts have spoken to the issue of whether broadcast type regulations will be tolerated in the context of the other platforms with a pretty definite no. And so I think that notwithstanding political pressure, you're going to see courts resisting that kind of a heavy-handed broadcast style, I think, regulation. And I just, along those lines, you know, broadcasters operate free over the air as broadcasters, and they also operate on these other platforms. I think it's important to see how, you know, things develop on these other platforms, and see what happens on these platforms without assuming that all broadcasters, when they were operating with these sort of other hats on as a provider of internet content, they shouldn't be subject to the same exact regulations they have on the broadcast platform. We need to make sure that they are operating on a level playing field with other providers of content on these other platforms. So I think symmetry is going to be key there as a public policy matter, and also just as a legal matter. I think it would be difficult if broadcasting was facing broadcast style, or anyone was facing broadcast style regulations.
Margaret, what's your take on that?
Well, my take on it is, I agree with Erin, but I'd like to amplify just a little bit. Cheryl said something very important in her introductory remarks, and that is that, you know, anyone can create content, and that means anyone can create content and put it on the internet. There are virtually no barriers to entry, and so if there is a demand for a certain type of content, whether it's children's educational and informational, if there is a demand and there's a person or a company who wants to satisfy the demand, there's nothing stopping that person or company. The theories behind the justifications for broadcast regulation of the type that Erin is referring to, I think are twofold. One, the spectrum is owned by the government and licensed to broadcasters to use in the public interest. And two, whether we still agree with red line or not, that spectrum is scarce, and that justifies a level of regulation. That's been the theory, and it's been endorsed by the courts, that is just simply not present on the internet. And so I think the idea of importing broadcast style regulations to the internet is a very risky and unsupported proposition.
Well, it's 2-to-1, content providers and champion of the public interest, so I'm going to let Cheryl respond if she wants to.
Sure, I just wanted to make a couple of remarks. I mean, one of the things I think I said at the outcome is that certainly what we have to do is think really carefully about how are the core values preserved. You just take the same exact structure that you have and try to impose it on a new system, obviously not, right? But that doesn't mean that the core values you're trying to preserve are not relevant. I think, you know, and I think equity across the board is really good. I think one example of what, you know, some of the things that I'm thinking about, for example, some of the things that have been teed up that we might see coming out of this children's NOI is, you know, how can you move technology, how can you move, say, individual screening or filtering devices, how can you put more control in the hands of the parents so that they can make their decisions without having the government to say, okay, you have to make this, you have to show this, you have to show this. So there's a way to be very equitable across the board that could put a lot more control in the hands of the viewers and listeners. Now, there's another part of it, which is sort of how do you make sure that there's sort of a certain amount of quality content available. But we've got lots of mechanisms. I mean, we've had, you know, public broadcasting set-asides. We've got all sorts of possible ways to help create more content. But the last point I wanted to make was that, you know, Margaret said there's no barriers to entry in terms of posting your information on the internet. If we have net neutrality, there are no barriers to entry. But as I think people were talking, as Ben was highlighting in the luncheon debate, the whole essence of many of the filings made by the network owners who are so opposed to FCC adoption of the new net neutrality principles are, we will make more money if we can favor, prefer, enhance some content over other content. So if you have net neutrality, then that's one baseline where you actually can, one way that the government can preserve all this wide and free open entry. But if the next thing you know, you have to, you have to give a part of your company to Verizon if you want to get carried on the internet, or at least to Verizon's customers on the internet, then we're back more to something that looks like the cable industry, where, you know, anybody who wants to create new content really winds up having as a business matter to give a part of their profits and a part of their company to one of the handful of dominant players in the marketplace.
Cheryl, you just raised a point that I think we asked Julie to respond to, and that's the whole idea of maybe the best thing is not importing existing regulations like some of the children's television rules or other forms of trying to limit or eliminate harmful content, but to put the ability to do that in the hands of consumers. So Julie, what can you tell us about what your members and what the electronics industry is doing? There are devices out there now that are have been found to be not used sufficiently enough. Parental control devices, block boxes, the V-chip and various kinds of ratings, all of which rely upon electronic technology to function. And what's going on in your industry? Are they anticipating that there'll be a need for more and improved products like that? What are the avenues that are being pursued in the electronics industry?
I can probably talk a little bit. I just want to give you some history before I go into where we are today and what's in development. But I want to remind the audience that it was the consumer electronics industry that invented the V-chip, and it was meant to be a service for parents, a device within a television for parents to use to monitor their children's television viewing. But the FCC loved it so much that they said, well, let's not make it a voluntary feature of the product. Let's make every TV have one. And for those of you who remember it, it was very controversial. But the industry did what the FCC had asked it to do, and the V-chip is now in televisions as a requirement. And for the small number of parents now who rely on over-the-air television, the V-chip does remain an effective and dynamic tool. But in addition, there are over the years, a myriad of parental control tools have developed. And we really believe the FCC needs to look at all of these tools in context, since people are receiving content through so many different ways. And just a quick overview of what they are. So you've got the built-in TV functionality, child locks, channel and time limitations. You've got third-party independent ratings. Of course, you've got the V-chip. You've got time management technologies. You've got DVDs, DVRs, VCRs. TiVo has a kid zone that's fantastic for parental controls. Video games have ratings now, and of course service providers like DirecTV, Dish, Comcast, Verizon, Fios, and others have very extensive and easy to use parental control technologies available to them. So what I'm saying is the industry is responding by developing tools that parents can use. There is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. We do believe further government intervention in terms of parental controls are really not necessary. I'm a parent, I have a 2-year-old. It's my responsibility to monitor what she's watching. But I'm happy to know that there are tools available to me during this time, so maybe I have to do some monitoring.
I'm going to jump back to Cheryl for just a second. And Cheryl, I think that what Julie has to say, and if all of those efforts reach fruition, it will be really great, and that will solve the problem. But does that satisfy what you think the needs are, or would you still feel that there may be a need for government to step in?
Well, I think I would agree in one way with Julie, which is that in terms of her history about the V-chip, I think that one of the difficulties we've had is that there hasn't actually been enough competition in terms of offering these features in the past. And one of the problems is because all the features are very dependent upon one device. Okay, so you have one way you can protect your kids if you have a TiVo, you have a different way you can protect your kids if you're using your V-chip, you have a different way you can protect your kids to do this. So, my concept of sort of a role that the government can play is to increase the opportunities for there to be vibrant competition, for example, among software providers, so that a parent could say, okay, look, I like the U.S. Catholic Conference system of ranking. That's my value system. That's what I want to use to decide what my kids see. How can I import that to every device that I have? And so in order to do that, you have to have some openness in terms of how the devices operate so that people can, offer, say, a third-party rating system that everybody can use. There should be some, impetus in the marketplace as it is to allow that, but so far, for example, in the case of the cable set-top box is one place. And even the V-chip, like originally the idea was that you weren't going to have to take just the one centralized rating system and use that. You could actually use other rating systems, and that unfortunately hasn't come to fruition. So, I think there's a really good place for vibrant competition, but I think we haven't seen it to the point where parents are able to use it. I mean, when you do the surveys, parents are completely confused. And I have have 2 little kids. I have 15 months and 4 years old. So I'm right in the Disney sweet spot. Believe me, we are seeing princesses at my house with quite frequency. Despite the fact that I actually didn't let my older daughter watch till she was 2 years old, but it's still there. It doesn't matter even how much TV you watch.
Julie, is something that you want to respond?
Actually, I have a couple points, and on the kid thing, my daughter announced the other day when she saw Mickey and Minnie Mouse who they were. She has, to our knowledge, she has never seen a Disney program. So they're
She knows. You don't have to see a Disney program.
They're going to get it. But I did want to point out Adam Fearer has written a number of excellent treatises on parental controls out in the PFF. You all know Adam. And I think Adam has really, you've dug deep for data and sort of parental trends. So I just, for those of you who don't know that it's available, go to the PFF.org website.
And
CEA did not sponsor it. It's all Adam.
But I would second the endorsement because Adam talks about the technology, but he also talks about the important role of house rules, basically, that management of watching in less technological and formal ways by parents. I wanted to just jump in and support Cheryl on the point that she made about multiple sources of ratings information. We are very supportive of that. I think one of the issues that makes it tricky is that the ratings information is included, and you probably all know this, in the bit stream of our signal. And so there are, some capacity limits. And so I think what would be ideal is if we were developing technology that allowed parents to reach out to perhaps an internet-based source of third-party ratings that were the ones that they chose for their family, and then if devices were able to block based on that, it would be terrific. But cramming 20 different rating systems into a television bit stream to work with a V chip that's set up to work with one rating system, is difficult. But we fully support parents having lots of information available about programming.
I have one more quick content-related question for Margaret. And I'm interested, I have another question for you too, but this one, I have lots of questions for everyone. It has to do with NBC's role as a provider of news, a journalism organization. In some of the proceedings, I think the media information proceeding that the commission just started, one of the questions that's raised, and one of the things that has been getting an increasing amount of attention on the Hill and throughout media circles, is the whole issue of what's happening to newspapers and journalism. There are all these new ways of distributing news. Is the way that the amount of news and the type of news that's presented able to be presented in the formats that are required for the second and third screen. Will that take over from television and radio newscasts as we know them? Will the newspaper become obsolete? What is your company's thinking on just how the standards of journalism that you've abided by and your objectives for news programming translates to these second and third screen, and what types of government policies you may be hoping for or hoping against?
We're very proud of NBC News. We produce the NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, the Today Show, Meet the Press. These are iconic news programs that actually do very well in the ratings too. But the ratings that we're talking about today are so different from the ratings from 20 or 30 years ago in terms of numbers of viewers. And so we have made a very conscious effort to get the content out onto the other platforms. You can view the nightly news program online with Brian Williams. He has a blog. So the news is all over the NBC.com website and accessible for free. So, I think that we very much want to be part of the second and third screens. We've made news available in New York taxi cabs. We've made news available through VCast, Verizon, Media Flow. We want to get it out there on as many platforms as possible. And oddly enough, we don't have such a bad piracy problem with news. I don't understand But, so, a little bit less concerned about that. We are gratified that the government has recognized the challenges that journalists are facing. It is expensive to send people to Haiti after a major earthquake, but if you don't send people to Haiti with cameras, people in America don't really know what's going on, and so it's just critical to have people on the scene. We also have fully developed local news teams at our owned and operated stations, and we're committed to that model. We think it's important. We think it's what distinguishes over-the-air television from other services. Those stations also repurpose the news onto their local websites, and that's obviously a good development too, because you can go to it any time of day or night. I think what we're concerned about is that the government's recognition of the challenges is maybe coupled with some ideas that may have surface appeal, whether it is some kind of subsidy or other financial support, but I think that that would lead to inevitably erosion of independence, which is something that we can't afford. So I think we'll be very interested in that proceeding, and I don't know, whether we'll participate in it directly, but we will certainly be monitoring it very carefully, and I expect the NAB, which we are a proud member, will be involved, and so we'll work with NAB on that. But I think that's a two-edged sword, to have the challenges recognized, but what are the solutions?
I'm going to go back to Aaron now. We've been talking about the second and third screen. I want to spend a moment going back to the first, and then from that to the second and third. And I actually have two areas of concern that I would like your take on. One is with regard to the first screen. There's a lot of attention and a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz about the second and third screen. The ratings on the first screen are being eroded by people multitasking and watching programming on the other channels. And Aaron, I'm wondering, in terms of your members who've invested over the years in this network of television, radio, and broadcast stations, and into transitioning those distribution outlets or transmitters to the digital at great cost and expense. Are your members threatened by the second and third screen? What is their reaction or response? I think in some circles it's in vogue to say that traditional television and radio stations, I know you shake your head, you've heard this, are going to be obsolete, or maybe even already are obsolete, and that we'll all be getting our video and audio programming in handheld devices or on computers. What is your association's position on that?
Well, a couple things come to mind. I mean, the first, with respect to the digital transition, I think it is great to recognize, broadcasters' investment in time and expense in making this transition and coming up with creative business plans, converting their operations to high definition in many cases, developing multicast streams of programming, many of which are, at the niches. It's allowing broadcasters to sort of play to niches as opposed to being a mass media all of the time. So they can be a mass media on their main channel and maybe have a niche on some of their multicasts. But and it's great to recognize that, but I think the bigger thing we all need to recognize is the promise made essentially to the American public, and also their investment in time and effort in making this conversion, and sort of it's time for them to have an opportunity to realize the benefits of the transition. So less from the broadcaster's perspective, but from the perspective of what was deemed to be in the public interest by Congress, and sort of having a chance for the public to realize the benefits of DTV and all the promise it holds. Things like the multicasting, things like high definition programming, things like the mobile DTV, operations that have already started in some, I forget how many markets I had this, 30 TV stations are now transmitting. We're on the cusp of a consumer showcase involving 8 stations here in the DC market that are going to be transmitting up to 20 channels of programming. That's going to include, programming ranging from, the favorite live local kinds of programs as well as special interactive broadcasts. And these are going to be going to a variety of different types of devices as part of this consumer trial, including netbooks, cell phones, Wi-Fi receivers, portable DVD players, a variety of these. So these are some of the services that are sort of, coming out of the free over-the-air broadcast space and coming out of the transition to digital. And we are just, beginning to get to the point of the public being able to realize this kind of benefits. And so now is a key time to sort of allow these, benefits to be realized as opposed to being scaled back or hampered in some way as is being debated, I think, within the context of, say, the broadband proceeding right now. I mean, we could do an entire panel, I'm sure, with just the four of us and with you as well, addressing the issues that surrounding, allocation of spectrum and the needs of, the competing needs for spectrum for a variety of different services. I think on this panel, we've probably filed several reams worth of paper about this issue, but broadcasters are committed to making sure that the public gets a chance to realize the benefits of digital, and also making sure that localism remains a key value and a factor, and it's not something that can be easily replicated absent the broadcast free over-the-air model. And these benefits inure not only to free over-the-air viewers, but to the entire viewing public, whether that broadcast programming is viewed, over the air or via cable and satellite. So there's, an important model at stake here. There's the availability of free programming here. And there's also a spectrum efficiency issue raised by potential reallocation, because the most efficient way to deliver video over the air is via broadcasting, to the mobile devices, the mobile handheld devices, and not through subscription type wireless services. So there are spectrum efficiency issues raised in that proceeding. There are public interest issues raised in that proceeding. And so I think, there's a lot that could be said, but I'll just start with that, and certainly happy to respond if others want to address that issue.
I think before we, I want to save some time for all of you to ask some questions, but before we do that, I'm hearing spectrum repurposing, and I know there are a lot of people that have designs on your members' spectrum here. And so I guess I would like to hear from Julie in terms of spectrum repurposing, how your members are looking at it, and then if either Margaret or Cheryl can say anything on that.
Sure. I'll just speak very broadly, and I think I speak for CEA in that we would not ask for an end. No one's asked for an end to over-the-air broadcasting, but what we want is the highest use of the spectrum. And then if we take an approach where we can all look at the swath of spectrum that's available and determine what the highest use is, let's find ways to get the maximum benefit for everybody. And I think we have recommended to the Commission that there are a myriad of ways we might do that. One of them was repacking of the broadcast stations. But again, I think these are suggestions, these are recommendations to the Commission, these are not demands of the Commission.
Margaret? Well, I think I would have to echo what Erin says about the investments that the broadcasters have made as part of the digital transition. And it was kind of painful, actually, to have these spectrum reallocation concepts floated just as we were completing the digital transition, costing billions of private dollars, not government funded, and being just on the verge of what we saw as a renaissance of broadcasting capability, particularly with the multicasting and the mobile, which is real. And so I think we're concerned that it not proceed recklessly, but I think we can count on this taking a long time. I think Ben said 7 to 10 years. I think we've seen 13 years in one of the PowerPoints on the broadband plan. And I think we would take the position that we're using the spectrum very efficiently, that the one-to-many broadcast transmission model is very valuable for communications purposes in this country, and we do not want to lose that. So I think I could see market-based initiatives if there were broadcasters who decided they wanted to pack it in, but I'm not sure that that quite gets the spectrum allocation pattern that the government would be looking for. A little concerned about mandatory.
Cheryl, what's the view from the public interest sector on this issue?
Right. A number of public interest organizations, including the UCC, combined to file a relatively short comment in response to the FCC's PN. And I think we echo some of the points made here. I mean, it's on the one hand, we very much value the Commission's desire to find a spectrum and leave no stone unturned and keep no sacred cows. A lot of the public interest community has been very interested in unlicensed spectrum and the white spaces, so using more creatively spectrum that's allocated to broadcasting now, and we think those are valuable approaches. But I think broadcasting is here to stay, should be here to stay in terms of emergency, in terms of news. There's not a replacement for that on the forefront, and if you're going to think about changing, you have to address all these other things, which is sort of my theme for this whole panel, right? Like, there's all these great things that we have in terms of broadcasting. You can't just throw them out the window and say, oh, everybody's just going to watch TV on their smartphone. And one of the most important reasons is, the underlying policy reason why we had digital set-top boxes, why we had a coupon program, is because we, as a society, believe that television is an important public service good, that you need your news, you need to understand what's going on in your community, you need to find out if there's a hurricane bearing down on you. And so, in particular, lower income people of color were much more likely to be relying on over-the-air television. The communities that I work with did immense effort trying to educate folks, help them figure out what the heck this box is, how can they possibly afford it when they don't have much money for, food or rent, and now, the TV that they, gets their mind off of things in the evening is going to potentially go off. So to just throw it out there as a PN in the context of the broadband plan seemed, not adequate to the task. So we, our filing was sort of like asking a lot of questions about how would we do this? Because I do think it's important. I think that the same communities that are relying on over-the-air digital TV today, really, we need to do a lot of work to help them get on the broadband tomorrow, but we can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Well, my closing observation on this is just that I think that we can all see that these broadband proceedings before the Commission and the whole issue of broadband involves a whole lot more than just net neutrality. And there are a lot of things out there for people who are interested in news and second and third screen and spectrum and just about everything to keep their eyes on in the future. So we can take a few questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Thank you. Maury Mechanic. This is, maybe I'm posing a dilemma rather than asking a question. Probably more to Margaret and Aaron, but others can speak to it as well. And it goes to what I think is the core issue here of where the FCC has authority today to regulate content on the first screen and how that might affect the second and third. And the obvious area is indecency. And the other thing that is true is that in regulating indecency on the enforcement side, the magnitude of the audience that sees the alleged indecent programming has a bearing on the magnitude of the fine. It can manifest itself in terms of the number of affiliates that carry the programming, or perhaps the time it's broadcast in terms of the likely audience and the mixture that audience is. But let's take the classic example of the wardrobe malfunction. That appears simultaneously on screen 1, screen 2, screen 3. The FCC has clear legal authority to regulate it on screen 1. Should it or does it have authority to regulate it on screen 2 or screen 3? Well, you might say screen 2 is the internet, and they really don't have the authority to regulate the internet. Screen 3 could be interesting because if your mobile phone gets it through a Wi-Fi connection over the internet, maybe you argue it can't be regulated. But if it gets it directly from the broadcast signal, then why is it different than screen 1? On the one hand, I would imagine people will be scared out of their whatevers to think the FCC starting to use this as a rationale for bleeding into regulating screen 2 and screen 3. On the other side, once you start drawing lines, they're on their face so irrational, I don't know how the FCC can have any meaningful regulatory authority at all. And as I say, I throw it out as a dilemma, but I'd like to hear people's reaction to that.
Well, I'm going to take the easy way out and say I'm not sure they have clear regulatory authority based on the pending litigation, and so we may see that that's not so clear after all. But I agree that that's a dilemma, and it sort of points out maybe the absurdity of the stovepipe approach to regulation, that you have the very same content on a screen, that looks the same, but in fact, it could be my smartphone that accommodates 3G, Wi-Fi, and the new mobile TV service, and
I don't know which one I was using at the
yeah,
time I saw the
yeah,
indecent, whatever.
It's sort of regulated differently.
That's
I'm not
interesting.
sure I can answer the dilemma, Maury, but I think you certainly posed it nicely.
I mean, the only thing I would say in response to that is, obviously there is a dilemma, and I think that when you look at indecency in terms of all the different things that the FCC is required to do and does under its rules, the specific adjudication of a particular item as being worthy of being fined is sort of the most intrusive thing that we have, right? I mean, there's a lot of things in terms of promoting children's content that is incredibly much more light touch than, deciding that what you put on the air was in violation of law and therefore you should be fined for it. The one thing that I do have to say, and I don't have an answer to your question, but the thing that I always come back to, and this is in part, this is not, UCC actually hasn't taken a lot of this on indecency, is we do a lot of work with the faith community, and UCC is a relatively progressive church, but we do try to maintain a good, serious dialogue with our evangelical partners on the journey. And what I come back to is the one thing about broadcasting is this is the one medium we have decided that everybody gets. It's in everybody's home. It is the one place where you can have a national dialogue about issues of importance. It's the one place where maybe people are going to get exposed to something else that they weren't necessarily on board with. But what you have in terms of the movement of content more and more towards things that are likely to cross over that indecency line is you're asking more and more people to check out. You're saying, well, if you don't want to watch it, then just turn off the TV. And there are millions and millions of evangelical Christians in this country who have said, okay, fine. I'm just watching DVDs at our house. We're not watching anything. And I think our society as a whole loses something when there is no place in our country that we can have this dialogue back and forth. So because Janet Jackson is going to do whatever in the Super Bowl, that also means that there's a huge number of people who are absolutely not watching anything else that might be offered on CBS. And I'm not saying that justifies the entire indecency regime or that answers your question, but I like to keep, to me that is what keeps me humble in terms of thinking about, what is the role of these rules and what can they play, in terms of our societal values and our societal, just democracy.
I just want to throw one thing in there. I also think our society values live television. I think it's really important. We already, delay entertainment programming for indecency reasons. It's not always a perfect system, but we do it. We do not delay live news and sports. And I think if we go that direction, we have lost something as a free society if we've eliminated live broadcasting. So I just want to make that plug. That's different from...
I was going to say indecency doesn't apply right now, though.
Yes, it does.
Well,
it's not a safe harbor. It's a different analysis, but not a pure safe harbor. But I just think live broadcasting is an important element of a free society in this world today.
One more question.
I think Julie mentioned when she, in her opening remarks about network operators doing things illegal that they don't know about, and I think she was referring to copyright rules and who's the enforcement, and I don't know if you said that or not.
I think it was Margaret.
If you're a network operator, why should the network operator be responsible for what their end users do that may violate copyright rules?
Well, first of all,
it gets into, YouTube, what content's being uploaded that might have music or something else on. But can you just comment on enforcement of copyright rules?
Sure.
For these network operators?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, most network operators do have in their terms of service that their subscribers can't violate copyright laws. So they've already got that in their terms of service, and it's a question of how do you enforce it. Secondly, I don't think that any of our network operators want to be part of an ecosystem that is characterized by massive lawlessness. I don't think any of us want that kind of a broadband ecosystem. And so I think the ISPs do care about the general environment in which they operate. I think they also see the pressure put on their networks from massive amounts of infringing content, so I think they care about it from that point of view, which brings up the reasonable network management issues. And I think we have seen success stories actually with video sharing sites. That's something that we in the content industry point to as a tremendous success story, because several years ago people said it would be impossible to keep infringing content off video sharing sites, but it has proven not to be. There is a set of UGC principles that a number of companies signed on to, and YouTube, for example, uses content recognition technology that blocks infringing content from being posted in the first instance. If something gets through, YouTube is also very responsive to requests to take it down. Now, we're not advocating that this be done without any kind of due process, without a recognition of people's privacy rights or even fair use, but we're talking about massive infringement of full movies before they're released to the public, full episodes of TV programs.
Well, I wish we had time to continue this because there are more questions I still have to ask. But I would like to thank our panelists for a very interesting panel.
Thank you, Professor Gregg, and again, thank you, panelists, for sharing your expertise with us. Right now, we're going to take a 10-minute break and then come back for our final panel of the day, which is highlighted by several more esteemed panelists. And if you're still hungry, please feel free to get some more food. And again, we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes.
If I known it was going to be here, I would have got a better logo. So I just had some money.
Well, actually, it was
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry about
So when you want to rethink something,
Julie said she was back at CEA. I thought she was too.
I knew she had left.
She went to, she went to NPR. I actually interviewed her on the job. It was an interesting job.
You're very welcome. Yeah, that's a good one. Especially glad you actually let me know that.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you. I just found a bunch of the SEC today.
Such a great panel today. We appreciate you coming so much. Supporting a lot today. Hey, you.
Good to see you again. Yeah. Special cancellation notice.
right, I'm gonna thank my moderators.
Yes.
I don't think there's a question about it.
Yeah, James and I can.
I'm not sure he knows it all the time. It's amazing. It's always fun to watch people testify in front of voucher. Because he can see through it where a lot of other members can't. And he'll just jump to the question. I love it when he takes the questions as staff and sort of just disposes of them and starts an inquiry with someone. And I hate to be on the other end of it. I was talking about it in front of him 2 weeks ago when he started out. Everybody else on the weekend handle, he starts it, I get really nervous. Oh, it's amazing. It's incredible, and especially, I would always want to know. There's nothing about it.
It's good to be seen.
I'm sure. So I've always said the hardest thing to do is the boss is smarter than you. No, and I mean, having someone like vouchers, there's so much more than the contract. Yeah. They don't cash out. Joseph wants to get their out.
Well, we actually have not been in that for opening that station, but it just all was kind of the first half of this period of this time.
Well, I look forward to that. What date is it?
There's litigation failure to adopt that one well, I think
great. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you.
I guess that's good.
Thank you again for coming.
So no, it just continues. Yeah, it's always easier when you know like something. So sometimes I have to, switch things up a bit, find new sound bite to throw out. Today it was my bike at means necessary.
I'm sitting looking at it.
Sundance is here.
Scout out. I've never been.
Yeah, he's the spot. He had I don't think the original stuff was good. Late on.
When is the latest?
Yeah, I went to
so Roseberry's now the claim claims that
are memorizing like the street patterns and everything. Yeah, it's a beautiful
and so yeah, like dollars. So describing how many millions of dollars
Sorry, I'm reaching. Getting ready. Sorry. I don't want to. Great turnout. Very excited for our final panel.
Of course she does. Yeah, it's good to see you. That's my kid. Hopefully. Okay, well.
So you guys want to take your seats? Gather up the rest of the panelists?
I hope so. And if not, you know, the rest of the council. Good to see you.
Have you seen Signing Time? Oh, Signing Time, really.
Someday you'll have please take their seats and start the final panel. Thank you.
So we can catch it, you know? Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah. A lot of discussion. I think we were blessed with a lot of great panelists. They all wanted to make sure they got their point of views out to us. But that's a good thing with these type of things. Okay. Well, maybe I'll ask them to come home and get the panel started.
I'm coming back.
Fine, for you.
All right, welcome to our fourth and final panel of the day, Roles and Responsibilities in the National Broadband Plan. Our moderator today is Sharon Gillette, the Chief of the Wireline Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and thank you all for sticking out to the last panel of the day. Much appreciated. We are here with an esteemed panel of great experts on broadband and government. And we're here to talk about the National Broadband Plan, which, as you know, will be out in about 3 weeks. I got the date right, about 3 weeks. But I can tell you what it's about. It's about access to broadband for all Americans. And that means both availability and affordability and, if you will, adoptability or usability. Those are my 3 A's. It works. The statute also talks about a number of national purposes to which broadband can and should be put, and to talk about how those interrelate to each other. There's a long, long, long list of them, but I'll highlight the most important 3, which are healthcare, education, and energy. We're fortunate to have with us today Kwesi Asari, who's from the Department of Education. So I am hopeful that he will tell us a bit about education and broadband today. I'm going to introduce each panelist, give them each a chance to make opening remarks about broadband in their agencies, and then we'll tee it off with questions. I'm going to introduce them in one order, but then let them speak in a different order, for the simple reason that Lisa Zana's name is at the end of the alphabet, and we felt it was only fair she should go first. Let me introduce to you our panelists today, who are Anna Gomez. Anna is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information at the NTIA. Lisa, as I mentioned, is the Chief of Staff at the Rural Utility Service. Kwesi Asari is the Special Assistant at the Department of Education to the Assistant Deputy Secretary there, who is Jim Sheldon. And we're also lucky to have with us Rob Davis from the Federal Trade Commission, who's an attorney advisor to Chairman Meetings. So with that, I'll start with you, Lisa.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You know, having a last name that begins with Z isn't all bad. When I graduated from law school, the entire class stood up and cheered. And my mom thought I was really popular, and I never had the heart to tell her I wasn't. It was alphabetical. She just didn't pay attention. All she cared about was her baby graduating. So in any event, it's a pleasure to be here. And I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the issues we deal with at RUS with the Recovery Act funding and the disbursement of the funds and the propagation of a NOFA and everything that's come along with that, are working with our great colleagues from NTIA as well. But in any event, the Recovery Act, from our perspective, is a bold effort to create or save millions of jobs while spurring economic activity. As you know, rural America is always in a difficult spot when it comes to receiving or access to communication services, especially advanced communication services. So we were lucky enough to have these funds, the $2.5 billion appropriated to us, to be able to focus on broadband in rural America, and that's what we're trying to do. The key to the Recovery Act is that the very projects and programs meant to promote short-term growth and immediate job creation in order to get us out of this recession are also going to set America on a path towards steady economic growth in the 21st century. And the powers that be recognize that it's important that rural America take part in this growth and expansion. A major commitment of the resources in the Recovery Act, improved access to affordable broadband, and that's vital to this objective. It's really interesting, RUS basically has 3 components, and they're the foundations to building communities. It's water and environmental, electric, and telephone. And as water and electric have become mainstays and foundations of communities in rural America, broadband is one of those as well. In fact, we often laugh, one of my colleagues who's in the electric program, who's now the Chief of Staff of Rural Development, which oversees not only RUS, which has the 3 utilities programs, but rural business and rural housing. So we do build communities from the ground up, literally. He said that he grew up in Oklahoma, and he said when electricity came to their farm, the first reaction that he and his brother had was, oh, now we're going to have to do homework at night. So essentially this idea of bringing broadband to rural America will have the same effect. It is going to build communities. It will give people options and opportunities that they didn't have before it came to them. We've changed things a lot in this second NOFA. For one thing, NTIA and RUS are not, we're working together, but we don't have one NOFA and one application. What we did was we discovered our respective sweet spots. And I'll certainly let Anna talk about their sweet spot. Let me talk a little bit about ours and some of the changes that we made that I think are important. For one thing, we have a 75-25 grant loan combination. It was 50-50 in the first round. Or you got 100% grant if you were in a rural, remote area. What we've done is we've changed it to 75-25, and this will allow us to be more attractive to potential investors in rural America, and will help ensure the network growth and development in rural America. We've decided to remove the separate funding bucket for remote rural areas, and now we have the flexibility to offer higher than a 75% grant to the most rural areas. And it would be based on certain factors: density, low median income, or high unemployment. That's where you would see some juggling of that 75-25 to perhaps higher than that. We will focus on last mile projects where there's an urgent need in rural communities. That doesn't mean we won't be addressing middle mile projects. Our middle mile projects will be limited to RUS, RUS borrowers and grantees. The other middle mile projects is a comprehensive community approach that NTIA can discuss, that Anna can discuss with you, where they're focusing on their sweet spot. But in any event, our last mile projects will directly connect homes, businesses, including critical community facilities, libraries, educational institutions, health and public safety institutions. When it comes to the middle mile projects, as I mentioned, we will focus on our current RUS borrowers and grantees, and NTIA will focus on the rest. We also modified our standards for eligible service areas so that any rural area in which at least 50% of the premises lack access to broadband service at the rate of 5 megabits per second, upstream and downstream combined, will be considered eligible. Now, those of you who focused on our NOFA 1 will see what we've done here. We've kicked out things that would have kicked out projects because they would be ineligible because they weren't remote or they hadn't asked for 50-50 and they asked for a different loan grant combination. What we're doing now is we're putting it on a sliding scale instead of, well, gosh, you weren't able to characterize yourself as remote even though you said you were remote, so we've got to move you aside and move on to the next project. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to be more sensitive to the different elements that might be out there and make sure that we have good opportunities and that applicants have good opportunities, and some of the issues that we'll look at will be on a sliding scale, as opposed, and it'll go to the overall scoring as opposed to, well, you said you were remote, you're not remote, and we're going to have to remove you from the possibility of getting a grant or a loan. We've also created more flexibility. We have a second review option where if mistakes are made, we can look at those again. It will allow an applicant to adjust its application for reconsideration. Transferability. If NTIA has a project that it can't fund, it can transfer that project to us if it's eligible within the four corners of our NOFA. We have also given our administrator priority points, which allows the administrator to grant up to 10 points based on a 100-point scale for projects that provide significant assistance to essential community facilities, promote rural economic development, support persistent poverty, or chronically underserved areas. Finally, in instances where a grant award is most needed, the administrator has waiver authority to move that 75-25 up to 100%. We hope that this built-in flexibility will allow us to attract high-caliber projects and target our funds where they're needed most and where our appropriators wanted them. So what we've done are things to streamline this process. We've done things to make it a less of an effort for applicants to go through this process with us in terms of not being kicked out for one reason or another. And on top of that, we've created 3 smaller programs that have a separate funding window, which will open later after we've had a chance to look at some of the infrastructure projects. The second funding opportunity will total around $105 million in grants, with the option to increase or decrease based upon what's left over after we receive and give some review to the infrastructure projects. There will be a special project for satellite service providers as the last opportunity to reach people we haven't reached with the infrastructure project. Technical assistance for regional planning, and for rural library grants. There was a concern that there would be some stimulus funds for libraries in rural America, that these stimulus funds would build these libraries, but they wouldn't be connected to anything. So we've taken that into account, and what we're trying to do is bridge a gap between stimulus funding as well as bridge that chasm between stimulus funding and the opportunity to get public and private funds after this stimulus round is over. So with that, I'm hoping that we are going to be addressing availability, affordability, and adoption, as Sharon said, and this is the manner in which we're planning on doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. We'll go next to Anna, who talks about NTIA's program.
Great, thank you. I think Lisa, as always, has done a wonderful job articulating. Everyone hear me? Yeah. Nice to see everybody, by the way. Let me say thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Sharon, and Catholic and OCBA for inviting me to speak here today. So we were going to talk about the broadband plan today, and I still think it's quite appropriate to talk about the broadband plan. We like to think of the national broadband plan as a three-legged stool. One of those is the actual development of the plan, which the FCC is hard at work at right now, and NTIA has submitted some administration comments for that plan, and we are actually looking forward to seeing the plan and continuing to work on it in the future. But we also have two other legs. One is our grant program that we also administer jointly in spirit and in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture and IES, as well as our mapping grant program with the intent to have a national broadband map by February of next year. So President Obama believes that all Americans should have access to broadband and to the opportunities that it brings with it. I was thinking it's nice to be here sandwiched between energy and education, because I feel like it's a nice